Great to have Carlene here today. Uh, Several years ago, I attended a forum that was put on by Common Cause at Olympia Brown Church in Racine. And it was all about reform. It wasn't just about redistricting reform, but Corey Mason spoke up at that forum, and he was in the assembly at the time, and he's now mayor. Attended a forum that was put on by Common Cause. Oh, hearing an echo here, Mark. Brown. Okay, should I go ahead? Okay, in any event, he was anguishing over the fact that when the Democrats were in power, that they didn't enact redistricting reform at that time when they had the chance to do it. So we know what happened right after that a governor came into power and with both houses under him was able to do redistricting any way he wanted without the courts interfering. So here's where we are today. And Carlene is in charge of the Fairmax project at Wisconsin Voices. And she's going to take it from here as to what's going on and what we can do as citizens to change the situation. So let's give a warm welcome to Carlene.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me here this morning. I really appreciate the time. I was sharing before we got started and went live that I used to attend the First Unitarian Society in Madison, and now I'm working mostly 6 to 7 days a week, so I tend to take Sunday mornings off, but today I'll take Sunday afternoon off. And I appreciate that your guest next week will be talking about Youth Empowered in the Struggle, the YES group as part of Voces de la Frontera. Several students, high school students from that group attended a training back in the end of February when we were still in person in Wausau about working on the redistricting issue, and they are some really incredibly dynamic young people. So I congratulate you on inviting them, and I know that you'll learn a lot from them. I'm going to share my screen and go right into my presentation so that if you have questions, you'll have that opportunity at the end. And again, thank you so much for having me here today. Okay, so share screen. There we are. So as Jerry shared with you, my name is Carlene Beshen, and I am the Fairmaps grassroots organizer with Wisconsin Voices. So I am organizing folks around the state, mostly volunteers, to help in this project. I call this presentation the Maps Mess in Wisconsin. So I'll give you just a little bit of a background. I'm sure most of you know this, but just so that we're all operating from the same set of assumptions and definitions. Redistricting is the process of drawing electoral district boundaries. It happens after the census because that's when we have the most accurate numbers. So if we have 50 precincts in an area and we need to reapportion them, we make our song, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. I'm sorry, I just really need people to mute because I get distracted noises. So if we have 50 precincts, and in Wisconsin, we call them wards that need to be reapportioned. So apportionment has to do with population into 5 districts. That would be 10 in each district. And in proportional representation, that would mean that the yellows, which have 60% of the population, would have 3 districts, and the greens would have 2. Now, these long, skinny districts are not convenient districts. Because they're long and skinny, it would take a representative to get from one end to the other, probably hours. So the other way here is also proportional representation and has the yellows with 3 districts and the greens with 2, but they're more compact. But either of these is a proportional outcome. Gerrymandering is when proportionate outcome is not the goal. When disproportionate outcomes are the goal. So you can see in the district with these very compact, very convenient rectangles that the yellows get 100% of the representation, even though they are only 60% of the population. In the other set of districts, which is more like what we have in Wisconsin, the Greens, who are 40%, get 60% of the seats, and the yellows get 2 seats or 40% of the seats. So this is a practice that is known as packing and cracking. They're the 2 strategies for gerrymandering maps. In this illustration, the first district here, or the first set of districts, are very competitive. They would be purple districts, toss-up districts. You wouldn't necessarily know who was going to win them. In a packed district, the center one here, the party that is drawing the maps, and mind you, this gerrymandering happens when the party that is drawing the maps draws them in such a way that they are advantaged by the maps. It happens by Democrats do it, Republicans do it. In Wisconsin in 2011, Republicans did it, but it happened in very different ways in other states. So this packed district has all reds in it. Everybody in that district is crammed in there. They're absolutely going to elect someone of their party. But in these other 3 districts, they are very much in the minority and will not have an opportunity to elect someone. In a cracked district, and that's these 3 here, a few voters are cracked off from their community, the community of interest that they have, the people who would vote like them. An example of this in Wisconsin in 2011 goes back to Voces de la Frontera. They happened to win the only suit that was brought against the maps because of the way districts 8 and 9 in the city of Milwaukee were drawn. One of those districts was cracked off part of the Latinx community and put them in a district with folks from Waukesha. It was a long, skinny district from the city of Milwaukee out into Waukesha County. And they had a successful suit that their vote had been diluted, that they were denied representation. So instead of ending up with 1 Latinx representative in the state legislature, they ended up with 2. So this goes back to 1 person, 1 vote. And it is very important that all of our votes count. So if you're a Democrat and you're in a Republican gerrymandered district, your vote is relatively meaningless. And likewise, in the other way around, if you're a Republican in a Democratic gerrymandered district. Now, mind you, there are parts of our state that are very, very, very densely Democratic and very, very densely Republican. There are more parts of our state that are not, that we would call purple, that are really a toss-up if the lines for the districts were not gerrymandered. And one of the things, or probably the thing that is so bad about this, is it really leads to hyperpartisanship. So the elections in 2018 were probably the best example of how this can happen. When all 5 statewide elections, governor, senator, attorney general, treasurer, and secretary of state, were won by Democrats. And in the case of Tammy Baldwin, very handily won by Democrats. And in the state assembly, 0.21 million, so 21,000 more votes were cast for Democratic state by Democrats in the state assembly for Democratic candidates, yet only 36% of the representation ended up being Democrats. So 54% of the votes were cast for Democratic assembly people. 36% of those seats ended up going to Democrats. And that's because in so many of these districts that have been gerrymandered, it's not a toss-up who's going to win. It's a foregone conclusion because they're 60-40 districts. So a little history about this. Back in 1967, there was a case that was brought to the US Supreme Court, the Reynolds versus Sims case, that required population equality in legislative districts so that one person and one vote really meant something. Before that ruling, districts were drawn in a very haphazard way. And a lot of times they were drawn based on area. So anybody who teaches math or who has been in a math class knows that area and density are very different things. So a rural representative might have a few hundred people in his or her district, while an urban representative might have several thousand. And that is just not equal representation. So this court case really led to some changes. The US Constitution does require, and this is a quote from the Wisconsin Constitution, I'm sorry, that we maintain the integrity of political subdivisions, meaning municipal and county boundaries, maintain communities of interest, and create geographic compactness. So after this 1967 ruling, the census became even more important in reapportionment, which means the number of Congress people we have in the US House of Representatives, and in redistricting, which is the map drawing portion of it. So to give you a little perspective, that ruling was in 1967, and the last time there has been cooperative bipartisan legislation in Wisconsin was 1971. Now, I like to throw myself in things to give you perspective. This is when I was a junior in high school. I couldn't find a 1971 picture. So I was a junior in high school at that time. Now I have a granddaughter who is graduating from college. So that's a long time ago. In 1981, 1991, and 2001, there was a lot of partisan bickering in the state legislature. The maps ended up being vetoed by the governor. Both Republican and Democratic governors have vetoed maps, and then they went to the federal courts to be drawn. And then came 2010, right after the last census, except it's not that simple. And as Jerry alluded earlier in his introduction, Democrats had the opportunity in 2009 to create, to pass nonpartisan redistricting legislation and create a process by which maps could be drawn. But if you take a look at the 2008 presidential election results in Wisconsin, Democrats were riding high in 2009, and they thought that they would win handily in 2010. Then came along the summer of 2010, and some of you may remember that summer. That was the summer of death panels for grandma if the ACA passed, the Tea Party rise, lots of things that changed the political landscape. And when we look at the map on the right here in 2010, these are the election results when Ron Johnson ran for the Senate. So Democrats had an opportunity, and I'm fond of talking about my friend Jeff Smith, who in 2009 was in the assembly from the Eau Claire area. He was head of the elections committee in the assembly, and he tried without success to get Democrats to pass this legislation. He had hearings. He just kept saying, you guys, it's not right. We have, or, you know, you guys and gals or whomever, it's not right for us to do this on a partisan basis. It needs to be nonpartisan. Ironically, he was gerrymandered out of his seat. So when he ran again in 2012, he did not win re-election. But he went to work for Citizen Action, and he lobbied the Republicans, who were the people at the time who wanted to pass nonpartisan redistricting legislation when he had been in the state assembly. And he lobbied them to do it. It fell on deaf ears. He ran again in 2018 and is now a state senator from the Eau Claire area in the 31st district. And he promises to make this the first piece of legislation that goes before the Senate when they reconvene in January. So that's a little history. There was an opportunity for Democrats to do this. They didn't, and Republicans took advantage, as I'm sure Democrats would have in 2011 when the numbers came back. But here's the real story of Wisconsin. These are the county maps of how voters cast their ballots in state Supreme Court elections. Now, we know the Supreme Court is supposed to be nonpartisan, but any of us who voted know that Democrats fall behind one candidate, Republicans fall behind the other. There's a lot of outside money that comes into these races. But when you look at this map, you see that Wisconsinites don't necessarily vote one way or another. We are very purple. If we were to put all of these maps into a vat together with their colors, it would come out to be very purple. And depending on the year, it would be a redder shade or a bluer shade of purple. But the point is that we vote in very purple patterns. And when these maps were drawn in 2011, the state legislature knew that. They knew exactly which wards tended to vote red and exactly which wards tended to vote blue. And they used that political demographic information to create maps that would favor their party. Voters, on the other hand, don't like this. Voters are really unhappy about this. In 2019, according to the Marquette University Law School poll, 72% of Wisconsinites preferred a nonpartisan commission. And then just earlier this year, just before COVID, there was another poll done, and this with almost the same results. I personally would love to see this done again in the midst of COVID and some of the things that have happened between the governor and the state legislature, and just see how people feel about this now. I suspect it would be higher than 72%. There is a model that works. Iowa created this over 40 years ago, and it was created by Republicans at the time. Ironically, the maps, just the 2011 maps in Wisconsin, have been litigated to the tune of over $4 million of taxpayer money being spent to defend those maps. The highest, the Iowa model has never been litigated in its 40-year history, and it only costs about $180,000 to administer. So this would be career civil servants, not the leaders of a party, who create the maps, and they are prohibited. And I think this part right here is really the essential part. They are prohibited from using demographic voting data like what was used in 2011. They have all kinds of other things that they need to consider, but they are not allowed to use voting data. I'm just going to play this short video. It's a 3-minute video that the Farmers Union created that gives some really important information. Oops, sorry, I had it muted.
The nation. Over the last several years, Wisconsin has repeatedly made national news for having some of the most gerrymandered maps in the nation. Let's take a look at what that means. State lawmakers represent the people who reside in a defined area called the legislative district. Wisconsin's legislative districts, created by the majority party in the legislature in 2011, were found by federal courts in November 2016 and in January 2017 to be an unconstitutional political gerrymander that unfairly dilutes the votes of over half the state's citizens in violation of both the First and the 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution. The current partisan map was purposely drawn to favor one political party. Using computer modeling and sophisticated data algorithms, legislators in the majority party pack voters of the opposing party into as few districts as possible, so the minority wins big in those districts, but doesn't win many overall. On top of creating some oddly shaped districts, this also sets the stage for extreme partisanship. Elected officials don't hear from constituents with other points of view because they've all been drawn into other districts. In fact, the districts have been drawn to so heavily favor the incumbent that new candidates don't even bother to run for office. In 2016, 38 of 99 state assembly candidates ran unopposed in the general election. For democracy to thrive, we need competitive legislative districts and real elections. Not only does partisan gerrymandering poison our democracy, it's expensive, and Wisconsin taxpayers are footing the bill. Rather than drawing fair, nonpartisan districts, Wisconsin has spent over $4 million to defend the current gerrymandered maps. Tax dollars should be used for public needs like roads, schools, and infrastructure, not to defend political battles the majority of citizens do not support. So how do we, the voters, get better district maps? Luckily, other states, like Iowa, have created laws and the computer software to draw legislative districts based on nonpartisan factors, such as population, county and town borders, and contiguity of land area. The Wisconsin legislature will draw new districts in 2021, so we need to make sure that the problem of gerrymandering in Wisconsin gets better, not worse. As voters, we must assert our rights. Here's what you can do. 1. Voice your support for the state to implement a nonpartisan redistricting commission on social media and to your legislators. 2. Help pass a resolution or referendum in your county to support nonpartisan redistricting. Wisconsin Farmers Union can help provide the tools and resources you need to make it happen. 3. Call your legislators and ask them to support nonpartisan redistricting. And if they don't, vote them out. Elected officials who don't believe in fair democracy have no business representing their constituents. This isn't a partisan issue. Rigging maps is wrong, whether it's Republicans or Democrats who are doing it, and there have been instances of both across the nation. The majority of counties in Wisconsin have already passed advisory resolutions in favor of nonpartisan redistricting. Voters, no matter their politics, want fair maps. Citizens should be choosing their representatives, not the other way around. For more information on how gerrymandering affects you, visit wisconsinfarmersunion.com.
I just want to throw out that the Farmers Union is part of the Fair Maps Coalition. So the coalition really has 3 buckets of work that we are engaged in. There is the legal strategy, preparing for future litigation, which is absolutely bound to happen, whether we want it or not. These maps are going to be litigated. We also have part of the focus of the mission of each one of the organizations that's part of the coalition in ending gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is definitely a form of voter suppression because it dilutes the voices of so many people. And nonprofits are also in contact with governmental agencies and offices in trying to influence how policy is written. And then perhaps the thing that, well, not perhaps, absolutely the thing that I'm most involved in is grassroots activism in promoting the People's Maps Commission, which I'll talk about in a minute, educating voters as in these kinds of opportunities and through the teams that are around the state, contacting our candidates and legislators and doing a lot of letter writing. Currently, as was stated in that video, there are a lot of county resolutions and referendums that have passed. 54 counties have passed resolutions. 17 counties have passed referendums. So the difference between those is a resolution is the county board voting for something. A referendum is when the board makes it available to voters to cast ballots on the same question. So it took 5 years to pass 8 referendums at the county level. Then just this past April, on April 7th, 9 more referendums passed. And there are currently 11 referendums that will be on the ballot, on county ballots in November, and 2 municipal ones, one in the city of Barron and one in the city of Racine. So there's one county, Marquette County, which happens to be a pretty conservative county, where the supervisors didn't want to vote on a resolution at the board level, but they were persuaded to allow voters to cast their ballots, and voters overwhelmingly supported by 72% in Marquette County. So it'd be interesting if those folks went back to the board now and said, hey, 72% of your constituents want this passed. So 65% is the least amount of public support any of these referendum have gotten, and 82% is the highest. 65% in Lincoln County, Northern County, very conservative county, 65%. And Dane County, of course, very liberal county, and 82%. These are the 11 counties. They're all over the state. They're very red, very blue, and very purple counties that have put this referendum on the ballot for November. And then, of course, the city of Barron and the city of Racine. And there are teams working in all of these areas to make sure that these pass. Oh, I should have mentioned that in Milwaukee County, where you all are, it passed just missed 80% of the vote in Milwaukee County back in April. So there are lots of ways that people are getting involved. They're sending postcards. These two, Vote Yes and End Gerrymandering, are postcards that are being sent, particularly these Vote Yes in counties where there's something on the ballot. People are posting things to social media, getting involved in other ways. Our goal as the Fair Maps Coalition is electoral maps created in 2021 through a transparent process that includes public input, consists of districts that reflect the statewide electorate, which if they were drawn without gerrymandered lines, many would be red, many would be blue, but most would be purple. And that respects communities of interest, meaning municipal boundaries, school districts, and communities of color. And there are more communities of interest. People living in the same watershed area might be a community of interest, or along a certain shoreline. So it's about making sure that people are not split from one another when they have shared interests. Oh, I want to say one more thing about that. One community of interest that I think is very telling about the split is that many of the Native nations are not split from one another, not split as the Native nation itself. In other words, the Ho-Chunk are mostly all in the same district, but the Native nations are split apart from one another. So they don't have enough collective voice in their votes to be able to elect an Indigenous person to the state assembly, even though they live in relatively close proximity in our state. So back in January, by executive order, Governor Evers created the People's Maps Commission, which we are very much glad about and helping to support in any way that we can, although we are not officially affiliated with the People's Maps Commission. In July, there was a call for applicants to be members of the commission. And just at the beginning of this month, the commission members were announced. There are 9 members, 1 from each congressional district, except for the 4th, where there are 2, which makes a lot of sense since most of the population of the state is in the 4th congressional district. I'm proud to say that Anne Marie McClellan from the 3rd congressional district and Dr. Anthony Phillips from the 8th congressional district were both parts of Fair Maps teams before they were chosen to be part of the commission. The commission has its first hearing this Thursday. It starts at 5:30. And it will begin with redistricting 101, and they will have some speakers who will talk about that. And then at 7:30, public comment will start. There is a way to apply for that, although it's first come, first serve, and people who live in the 8th congressional district are being prioritized for oral presentations. So that is happening this Thursday. The 4th congressional district, where you are, is in December. And so I strongly urge you to be a part of that. One of the things that we are doing as the coalition is to make available, actually it's always available, but to really promote screenings of Slay the Dragon, which is a documentary film based on what happened in Michigan when they were able to get a ballot initiative to change their state's constitution. We do not have that option in Wisconsin. In order to change the state's constitution, any legislation has to pass the state legislature for 3 consecutive sessions, and then it goes to the people. So we don't have a ballot initiative. The best way for us to do this is through legislation. So that is what we are shooting for. Then on Monday, 2 weeks before the panels, we are the hearings, excuse me, we are hosting a panel of local folks to talk about how gerrymandering affects the issues in their region. So we just had that last Monday. We had a panel of folks from the 8th congressional district who talked about the issues and in the 8th congressional district. Then this last Thursday, we had testimony training to help people write their testimony and think about what they would want to say and practice it. And then we're all absolutely going to follow up with anybody who's involved to keep them engaged, because this is a long movement. We are not in a sprint, folks. We are in a marathon, and this is going to take a long time to settle. And so we need to be prepared for things not happening very quickly. So I just want to let you know about some things that are coming up this week. On the 30th of September, there will be, so the presidential debate is on Tuesday. This is on Wednesday, and the first hearing in the 8th Congressional District is on Thursday, and it will be available on YouTube. But this is an opportunity to hear from former Senators Tim Cullen, he's Democrat from the Janesville area, and Dale Schultz, who is actually featured in the film, former radio talk show host from WPR, Joy Cardine, will be the moderator of that, and it's sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. I will provide these slides to Jerry, and there are live links in here, just so you know, so that you can go online and actually register. And it is also posted on the Fair Maps Coalition Facebook page. Then again on October 6th, if you miss them on the 30th, Dale Schultz and Tim Cullen will be part of the 2020 election experience, sponsored by UW Parkside, and John Scott, who's part of the 1st Congressional District Fair Maps team, will be moderating that. And again, there is a live link on this that you can use to register. So ways that you can get involved, you can volunteer with a Fair Maps team in your region. There are folks in the 4th Congressional District who are working on this. So again, this is a live link that you can use. You can support candidates who have pledged to support nonpartisan redistricting legislation. This is on our Facebook page, our Fair Maps Coalition Facebook page. And there is this list is updated daily, so that anybody who signs on, if you're looking through this and you don't see your legislator or the candidate who is running in your district, please contact them, ask them to sign the pledge. They get this nifty pledged candidate logo that they can use on their Facebook pages or in their social media, on their websites. It is not an endorsement. We are a C3 organization. We don't endorse. So anyone who pledges to support nonpartisan redistricting legislation can certainly use this emblem. And then finally, you can support our work. This is a link to donation form if you would like to do that. So as I said before, I work mostly with volunteer groups, so we don't have a lot of extra money coming in, and a lot of what they do comes out of pocket. And so we're trying as best as possible to do some re-granting to Fair Maps teams around the state to help them with advertising and billboards and postcard postage and such. So anything that you can do is certainly helpful. And then this is a quote from David Daly. He is an expert and has written several pieces recently. He was featured in Slay the Dragon. We are the only ones who can save us. This is a grassroots movement, and the more that we can amplify our voices to our electeds and make it clear that we do not like what's happening now, the better. So I'm going to stop my share now, and I don't know how we are for time, but I welcome anybody who has any questions. I'm going to just read what Mark has written. Given the extremity of present gerrymandering, won't it be similarly effective? Won't it similarly affect efforts create Fair Maps, a system for creating them? Seems like a catch-22. You know, that's an interesting observation, Mark. One of the things that we know is that One of the things that the courts did not like about the present maps was that over 50% of the incumbents were drawn out of their districts. And so it's called core constituencies, and the folks who look at these like it when there's not a lot of turnover. So we certainly don't want any new maps to start with these very gerrymandered maps. Part of the reason for the People's Maps Commission and collecting public input is for those folks to, and that is a very nonpartisan body. I did say that Tony Phillips is part of a Fair Maps team, but he's a Republican, and he's very upset about what's happening here. So part of what we want to make sure that we do is we have this set of maps for the legislature, for the state legislature and for the Congress that the People's Maps Commission has drawn. And then we have the set of maps, which we expect will be, there's Wisconsin, which we expect will be very similar to the current maps, to make that comparison, to say, this had public input, this did not. This respects these things: transparency, communities of interest, and reflects the state electorate. These are drawn using voting demographics and are very much drawn to favor one party. Tell us again how we find out what position. Okay, so I can put that link really quickly into the chat. And then you can check it out. And if your legislator is not, or the candidate who's running for your seat is not on that list, please contact them. We as a group, as the coalition, can contact these legislators and candidates, but quite frankly, it's much more effective if their constituents do it. We're this amorphous group. They know where we're coming from. They know what we want. But when you as a constituent say, hey, this is important to me and here's why, they're much more likely to respond to you. Dennis says, can't Wisconsin citizens generate their own legislation by statewide referendums called propositions? No, we can't. We don't have that. So we can, there have been some attempts, the recalls, for example, that was a statewide referendum on politicians. We don't have, first of all, any sort of, they're called ballot initiatives. In California, they're prop this or prop that, but they're a ballot initiative. We do not have that in our state constitution. So the only way to change our state's constitution or to have a law is to have, is through the constitution, through that 3 sessions of the legislature passing something and then going to the voters. So the marriage ban amendment passed that way back in 2006. But it did, and the Equal Rights Amendment, ironically, the Equal Rights Amendment passed that way, right? But we don't have a ballot initiative. Other questions folks have? Feel free to unmute yourself and just ask the question. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yes, didn't we used to have that ability as part of our long progressive tradition here in Wisconsin, I thought, to generate your laws like they're doing in California?
Not that I know of. I could certainly research that, but my understanding is that the Wisconsin State Constitution does not allow for ballot initiatives.
It's too bad.
Yeah, I agree. Other questions? So there's a lot going on, and as I said, this is not going to be quick or easy. And I often tell people that they just need to take on what they are able to do, because if we try to do everything, we can get burnt out really quickly. So it's important to, right now, we've been doing things to support these various referendum on the county ballots and to make sure that folks know where their legislators stand, promoting the People's Maps Commission. A couple of other things to note. The census, of course, plays a big role in this. The timeline for drawing maps in Wisconsin starts when the numbers come back from the federal government. And you probably know that there's a lot of different litigation going back and forth about exactly what will happen there. It's possible that it could go to the end of October, the counting process. Right now it's in court and everything has been, the stopping of the winding down of the census has been halted until the court case is finalized. So the census takers who are going door to door in those hard to count areas are still doing that currently. And we are very hopeful that the courts find that they are able to continue until the end of October. The Census Bureau has said there is no way they'll be able to have an accurate count to the president by the end of the year, which is what he's currently demanding. So again, an accurate count and as complete a count as possible is very, very, very important. One of the things that happened in 2011 is that the numbers came back very quickly. And at the same time as Act 10 protests were happening, the maps were being drawn in law offices by folks with lots of sophisticated software and demographic voting data. So we were many of us, I was a teacher at the time, I was out there protesting, were distracted by the Act 10 things that were happening and not really paying attention to the fact that our maps were really being rigged.
Wow.
So keep your eye on the census.
Can you tell us anything about what is happening in other states other than Iowa?
There are multiple different methods. I'm trying to think of the right word. So there are commissions, which are independent. There are models like the Iowa model where civil servants draw the maps. There are models, there are lots of different ones and I think if you want to see that, going to the Campaign Legal Center, the Campaign Legal Center is are experts on the various methods of drawing legislative maps. So what's been talked about mostly in Wisconsin is sort of a hybrid model of the Iowa model. Iowa is a very homogeneous, for the most part, state. There is a fairly large Latinx population that works in agriculture. But other than that, it's a pretty white population in Iowa. So our population in Wisconsin has a lot more diversity, and we have more urban areas than Iowa does. So some of the things, you saw those Iowa districts are, Iowa's already a rectangle, and then it's divided into four. Our map would not be nearly that simple. We have a greater population, we have more diversity, but the key there is the not using any sort of voting demographic data. Ironically, there are some states that require the use of voting demographic data. Arizona requires it, even though they have a separate commission, so that they draw maps that are contiguous and compact and as competitive as possible. So we're saying, no, don't do that. Just don't use voting data. Look at the population, look at the communities of interest, look at these, get community input, but no voting data, because it's far too tempting to rig things. People like power. Power really does corrupt. It is greed at its highest level. Yeah, go ahead, Dennis.
It's too bad, given the amount of money that's being spent on campaigns here in Wisconsin, that there couldn't been some kind of coordinated attempt, in this case, probably with the Democratic Party, but possibly with the Republican Party as well, just stressing the importance to a democracy of a fair vote, and then some advertising from one or both parties, um, encouraging people to support candidates that say that they are for this kind of these referenda supporting through the counties. So you'd have like a statewide interest and push to get this through, because it's just one of the many disgusting things about the current state of our democracy and voter suppression and so on. So I would think it's something that both parties could get behind for real democracy in America.
So I don't disagree with you, Dennis. And I work for a C3 organization. There are lots of C3 organizations that are involved in this work. And so we don't work with the parties, either one of them. There is a lot of push from Represent Us and organizations like Represent Us that have more of a C4 component to them. There is the Futures Caucus. That's another thing that you might want to look up. It is, I'm not intimately involved with it. I do know about it. So it's a millennial effort that is bipartisan or nonpartisan and is trying to get as many legislators as possible to agree to be part of the Futures Caucus. Robin Vining and trying to remember the other fella. So it is younger Democratic and Republican and independent legislators who are saying, we need a return to civility, we need a return to fairness, and we pledge to work together to create that. In the last legislative session in 2019, all of the Democrats and 5 Republican Assembly people signed on to co-sponsor nonpartisan redistricting legislation. So there has been an effort to get everybody who wants to represent we the people to be part of this. And we get lots of very convoluted reasons why some folks don't want to sign on. So I think, you know, there are a lot of efforts, Dennis. There's a lot of resistance. And I'll go back to power corrupts, and the people who have the power currently very, very, very much pressure people in their caucus not to sign on to this. And it's too bad. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jerry, you raised your hand.
Yes, as I recall, there was a lot of information that was accumulated by the Republicans to draw these maps that was supposed to be public record. And I believe they destroyed a lot of stuff, and I think there's a lawsuit involved to reveal what they were doing in secret behind closed doors. Do you know where that's at, or if that's kind of a dead issue now, or if there's something that may come out of that?
So what I can tell you about that is that, yes, there was a lot of obfuscation trying to keep from having to share that information. So as I said, in 2011, these maps were drawn in the law offices of Michael Beston Friedrich using the software that had been developed by Tom Hoeffler, who some of you may know. He has since died, but he was very much behind Red State, which was software, very sophisticated software that used demographic voting data to create districts. one of the other things that happened in 2011 with the drawing of the maps was some rules changes that the leadership put into effect. So in most cycles, drawing maps would start at the municipal level with ward, and then that would go to county supervisory districts, and then that would go to the state assembly, and the state assembly would draw, and then the assembly districts would be nested inside of the Senate districts and those inside the congressional districts. What happened in 2011? They said, nope, stop municipalities, stop counties. We, the legislature, are going to draw the maps first, because they wanted that ward data, that voting demographic data, to put into the maps that they drew. So then after that, it went down to it created a huge mess for the counties and the municipalities, especially when assembly districts cut through cities. Like Appleton is in two districts, different places. So to answer your question, yes, there was a lawsuit. They tried to get that information. The folks literally took hammers to the hard drives. And tried to destroy the information. So then they call them forensic data people, right? They somehow were able to take those attempts to destroy the data and glean from them what had happened. So it changed things pretty dramatically. What they found was that the folks who were drawing the maps drew the lines till they got a majority. And then they changed them till they got a little bit more of a majority. And then they changed them till they got a little bit more of a majority. And they changed them until they had easily 60 seats out of 99. And then they kept upping the voting of the opposition and changing the lines ever so slightly, until they could keep that number of seats. And they had 57% of the opposition vote. So, I mean, the Republicans were doing that, right? And they kept upping the Democratic vote till it was a 57% Democratic vote statewide. And they could keep that majority. That's how much. That was 9 iterations of the map. They kept the most egregious. That's the ones that we're living with now. So to answer let me answer the next part of that question. So is that dead now? Well, it went to the courts in 16 and 17. They said that this was absolutely a political gerrymander. Then it got appealed all the way to the US Supreme Court. But then there was the case of Rucho, which was a North Carolina case, North Carolina and Maryland, I believe. North Carolina was Republican gerrymander, Maryland was Democratic gerrymander. When the courts said, we can't do this, the Supreme Court, this is a state thing. And, there is just an incredible dissent that was written by Justice, Hispanic woman, Latinx woman. All their names have gone out of my head. Did you know it, Lorraine? Sotomayor. She wrote an incredible dissent on that, and I don't have it memorized, but you should read it, or better yet, hear her read it. It's available that way. Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Thank you for all your good work on this. I apologize if somebody's asked this question already. I lost contact and had to log in, so I lost some conversations. My question is about this Fair Maps Commission. That does not have any legal status, does it? And so even though it's appointed by the governor, it doesn't have any legal status. That's why the legislature, Republican controlled, will draw the maps and start it out. And that's why you say there will be legal fights, right? And that's why it's more important than ever that we contact our legislators on this, because there's no legal status for this commission, correct?
Well, I think there is legal status in that the governor created it. He did not appoint, he created it. So just to be clear, the 9 members of that commission, the People's Maps Commission, were selected from a plethora of applicants by 3 retired circuit court judges, 1 from Milwaukee, 1 from Madison, 1 from Allegheny County. And those 9 commissioners, members of the commission, will hear oral public testimony, which is very important, because that is the transparent process. And there is also a method for submitting written testimony to that commission. So I encourage you all to participate in those, because those things are really important for what is, like, as you say, Bruce, what is likely to turn out to be litigated maps. So, you know, what citizens have to say about how we are governed is the most important thing in a democracy. And so it's important that we make those things known and that we don't shy away from contacting our legislators, holding our legislators accountable, telling this commission what it is that we think needs to happen. And because that is our opportunity, and we need to seize it. I'm aware that we're after noon. I don't know how long you want to go, Jerry. I'm happy to stay on as long as people want to talk, but it's up to you.
Well, maybe 10 minutes or so?
Yeah,
How's
sure.
that? Okay. I just had one question for you. As far as these People's Maps Commission, is there a timeline when we'll start seeing these presentations of the maps in different areas?
So it's unlikely that we'll see any maps from them until after all of the hearings. So there's 1 hearing a month, one in each of the congressional districts through April. The one in the 4th congressional district, where I assume most of you are, is in December. You can watch them, and I'll be watching every one of them, taking notes and contacting folks. But I think that it's probably a good idea, if you're interested in this, to watch them and to think about what you feel is the most effective testimony that's coming through, and also to think about the kinds of things that people are talking about around the state, because it's really important that we are, you know, I don't live in Milwaukee. I work, Wisconsin Voices is based in Milwaukee. I learned a lot about Milwaukee having traveled there quite a bit for my work, but you know, there's considerations in other parts of the state that we just don't often think about, because we live where we live and we know the people that we know. And so when we're thinking about our whole state and what makes sense and what's fair and reasonable and how different communities of interest should be considered in these maps, I think it's educational and important for all of us to know these things. I don't know if that really answered your question. Go ahead, Bruce.
How does anyone get the demographic voting data that you mentioned, that is the basis of all this work? Is that public information about?
Absolutely, that's public information. So if you were to go on to the website for your county clerk, you would be, well, actually, if you go on for the Wisconsin Election Commission, you can download a spreadsheet, and it's like miles long. I've done this just for my little township, and it's still like pages and pages. And then you can look and you can see how each ward in whatever area voted. And so, you know, I have a very dear friend, Charles Uphoff, who is a data maniac. He loves data, and he was on the school board for many years. And so he's gone into these maps and he's done some comparisons of how folks voted and how much funding their school system got. and how much voucher schools got in their system, or how many kids received free and reduced lunch, and just looked at funding. So yeah, there's tons of this data out there. It's reams and reams and reams if you print it, which is the way I find easier to look at it. And then you color in those, I literally color in maps. Well, you see the colored map behind me, right? It's just an easier way for me to look at things and think about them.
Thanks.
Okay, I think we're down to about 7 participants at this point. Maybe this would be a good time to finish.
Sounds good to me. So I really appreciate the time and your interest, and I hope that you will go to the fairmapswi.com website, check out all the stuff that's available there, sign up to volunteer, see how your legislator stands on this issue. If you don't see their name, make sure that you send them the pledge and say, hey, this is important. And then also, I invite you to get involved with the team in your area, write letters to the editor, voicing your support for nonpartisan redistricting legislation. Watch the hearings on Thursday. Tune in on Wednesday night to hear Tim and Dale. Whatever you can do to get involved is helpful, and we appreciate the effort.
Okay, thanks, everybody. I'm going to be stopping the live stream